Your Excellencies, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the next panel discussion, this time dedicated to transforming European economies smartly and efficiently by leveraging sources to prepare for future. This time we will discuss economic opportunities which are stemming, for example, from the new tools that are available right now in the EU, especially Next Generation EU and the Repower EU. And during this panel discussion, we will welcome here Andrea Ferjenčíková, Marie Doné, René Neděla, Jan Švejnar, and the moderator Pavel Hnát. I would like to ask speakers and the moderator to take the seats, and we are welcoming you here at the Prague European Summit. Let me meanwhile remind you that you can interact with the panel via Slido application. You can find this event under the hashtag PES 2023. And you can also see the instructions here on the screen. So you can find this discussion and add your comments or questions here. And I can see that the panel is ready for discussion. So I would like to pass the floor to Pavel Hnát, Vice Rector for Education and Quality Assurance from the Prague University of Economics and Business. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind invitation. Good. Still morning. I think that everyone is looking forward to lunch already. But this is, I think, a very critical topic. We have decided that there are many economists and economics teachers even, so we will make this not very theoretical, but we will definitely use the benefit of having macroeconomists in the panel so that we can understand the topic from the broader perspective. I'll maybe once more introduce the speaker. European Commission is represented by Marie Doné, Director of Recovery and Resilience Task Force. Thank you very much for receiving our invitation. European Investment Bank is represented by Andrea Ferjenčíková, who's located in the Prague office of the AIB. We have Professor Jan Švejnar, the Professor of Economics at the Columbia University, and then Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Industry and Trade, René Neděla. And as we've kind of slightly discussed what's going on in this panel, we've decided to go alongside the topic of growth and probably more from the point of view what are actually the sources of growth and how creativity and digitization can actually help us in here. And maybe why sometimes we feel that Europe is lagging behind in these things. And I will use the benefit of having Professor Švejnar here and maybe starting with the first question going on him, and then I will be more than happy to have your inputs in Slido. So, Mr. Professor, how is it? What are the sources of growth? How creativity, digitization, business environment can actually make Europe grow better? And you have this unique experience. You can compare with a lot of countries in the world. Please do so.
Yeah, it certainly can. Let me just give you a very quick background. If we went back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, the discussion in the world was that Europe and Japan, for that matter, have pretty much caught up with the United States. And we were discussing where Europe will overtake the United States, in which areas. Okay? What happened in the next following 33 years or so is that the US has grown dramatically compared to Europe and Japan. Japan basically stagnated, slow growth. Europe grew slowly on average. Okay? So the differences went totally in an opposite direction. Part of it was that Europe basically missed the train on digitalization. Right? The US big companies, the Apples, the Amazons, Googles, etc., emerged during that time, subsequent time, and the technical aspect, the digital era, set in, and European companies are missing. Okay? If we looked in the early 1990s, the top 20 companies in the world, a large number of them were European. Now there is none. Well, no, there is LVMH, which is not a technological company. That's a luxury goods company, right? So that's the only place where Europe is now present in the top 20. The rest of them are American, some Chinese, and Japanese, Korean, right, etc. So Europe has clearly missed the train, and the question is, what can it do to really try to catch up? And give you another statistic which is telling. Over the last 50 years, the United States has kept its GDP at 1/4 of the world GDP, with fluctuations, but it stayed basically at 1/4. Europe, which was close to 30%, is now approaching 15%. The fastest decline in modern history of a continent or group of countries. So the challenge is really there. Okay, Europe is basically not performing where it should be. Human capital in Europe is similar to that in the United States. I'm not talking about China because it's very dissimilar, a miracle, but Europe really should be asking itself, why is it not where it should have been starting in the late 80s, early 1990s. And the problem is that really there has not been the switch to modern technology, the innovation drive, even though the resources, human capital is there. And it has to do with the incentives, it has to do with the legal institutional system. Take even now the approach to green technology. The US in the Inflation Reduction Act is basically stimulating production. The subsidies go towards entry into the market, new firms entering the market, creating competition, and in the long run, there will be a lot of relatively cheap energy. Right? Europe is going the opposite way. It's taxing, which is fine. It's trying to switch from one resource to another, from traditional to modern, but it's not in the way of stimulating entry into the market, increasing competition, and moving ahead with innovation. Right? So maybe for the start, I'll sort of stop here saying, look, Europe has a big challenge. I'm positive, always optimistic about Europe, because it has so much potential. Right? The Americans have pretty much eliminated inefficiencies and have to innovate, otherwise they will not go ahead. Right? The Europeans can do the same, plus they can eliminate inefficiencies. I've just recently finished with colleagues from the European Investment Bank and one at the University of California at Berkeley, a study where we compared inefficiency in the United States and Europe across all the European countries. And we basically are estimating that if Europe became as inefficient as the United States, but increased its efficiency to the level of the United States, European GDP would be about 50% higher. So that's a big, big difference.
Thank you. Professor, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more where digitization contributes to growth? Because if you go to micro level, digitization is simply just a mean. It's not, in fact, bringing new value, right? Maybe it unleashes the potential of people that are doing things ineffectively. So maybe what are the ways how digitization can actually contribute to growth?
Well, it's contributing to growth. It's the technology. It's the modern technology, right? You had Industrial Revolution, where you had the steam engine and so on, you know, all the way through to now. It's the last 20, 25, 30 years, the way that modernization takes place, makes industry more productive, makes agriculture, makes services more productive. We're a service economy now everywhere among the modern countries. You know, the Czech Republic, for instance, here, often people say we're an industrial economy. Well, there's a little bit more industry here as a share of total GDP than elsewhere, but it's primarily a service economy, right? So it's a service economy, and the digitalization is certainly a way to proceed. And nowadays, of course, it's going to be artificial intelligence. So there is another train taking off, and the question is, you know, will Europe be in the driver's seat, or will it be just a follower? Right? So it's another thing I would like to say. Europe has been playing too much the role of follower rather than the leader. And you see it at various levels. Adoption of technology, even how the CEOs, chief executive officers, behave. The American CEOs are much more self-confident, on average, than the European ones. No reason for it, right? But it is there. The European stock markets, they start 6 hours ahead of the US, but as soon as Wall Street wakes up, all markets follow Wall Street, right? Again, followers rather than leaders. So, you know, you can find examples, you all know, where to find them.
And digitization per se, is it replacing or enabling technology?
Well, it's an enabling technology, sure. Every technology replaces something, right? But I think we shouldn't worry about that. And it'll be interesting with respect to artificial intelligence. We shouldn't worry about that in terms of replacing and creating long-term problems. There are adjustment problems always, especially human problems. But unemployment, the unemployment rate over decades and centuries has pretty much with fluctuations stayed stable. So it's not like we are creating more and more unemployed people. No, basically there is restructuring, and there is restructuring with digitalization, there is restructuring with artificial intelligence. But so far, everything that we've had, containerization, industrial revolution, you name it, whatever it was, didn't lead to long-term unemployment increase.
Thank you very much. Mari, Europe usually has strategies, but then it struggles how to make the member states follow that strategy. I do remember the Lisbon strategy, I do remember other stuff. So what are the marvelous ideas at the European level to tackle with the issue Professor Schweinar just mentioned quite critically, even though trusting in Europe's ability to at the end catch up? So what can the Commission offer? What are the European level ideas in this respect?
Okay, a vast program. I think, of course, I will in a second come back to your question on all EU initiatives, and obviously having those initiatives at European level, in particular when there's funding behind, is indeed one way to try to make Europe stay at the frontier and maybe indeed try to then take a leadership role aware of our starting point. But I also want to underline that, what we are doing today with the team being in Prague is also, trying to have that implementation at member states level. We really also need to underline the national ownership and with the European tools that we have, also making sure that there is a concrete implementation in the member states. And in terms of the different sources of growth, you have really several areas, and we can come back to them. But let me just, in terms of structure, there is indeed education and skills and reskilling and all that. There is indeed everything which is in the area of, I would say, better regulation, trying to have a supportive entrepreneur environment and everything that we can do in that area. And I in that context, certainly, if I can dwell a bit more on that one, you must be aware that we now in the EU launching this initiative of SME Envoy, trying to really understand what those barriers are and how we can improve in the EU single market. And then, of course, with the reality on the ground in every member state, facilitating the daily life of the SMEs, because this is really the backbone of the EU economy. You must be aware also that our president has recently tasked Mr. Draghi to draft a report on EU competitiveness and prepare again, the reflection on possible future action plan and initiative in that area. So, along those lines, there are EU dimensions where we're pushing trying to really reduce those inefficiencies and contribute to productivity and competitiveness. I think also to resonate a bit from the RRF perspective, it's important to underline that in all plans for all member states, one part of the reform program, which is indeed really making a bet on the resilience and the medium-term and the long-term competitiveness. It's really cutting red tape, facilitating the daily life. So we have in all member states, and also in Czechia, reforms to digitalize administration, but also indeed the SMEs, making sure that we support them in, having a better level playing field and access to, sometimes one-stop shop or, facilitating the administrative steps they need to take, supporting them in international competitiveness and simplifying, shortening permitting process in the construction, in the deployment of renewables, along many, many areas so that they gain competitiveness and efficiency there. So that's, let's say, the poll on supportive environment. And then we can come back another question, also touch on the digital area you mentioned already. So also Europe has a strategy there. In Europe, Fit for Digital Age, many programs and many indeed projects with financing behind, because I mean, when you look indeed in general in the EU, but to focus again a bit on Czechia, there are many indicators where Czechia is ahead of the EU average, but there are also still areas where they can catch up with the average and try to reach the frontier. So in the Czech plan, for example, in the whole financing envelope, there's almost 23% of the budget that will be dedicated to digitization and trying to gain the frontier. There is substantial money going into infrastructure, fixed connection. So I'm sorry I'm going to bore you a bit with some figures, but I think it's also important for everybody to realize how much EU money is going there. So it's 148 million euro going into infrastructure fixed connection. It's 60 million euro going into 5G networks. It is promoting 5G solution for smart cities and industry. So really focusing on that concrete implementation with 45 million. And there is also a very important, and that's going to link the SME angle and digitalization angle. This tool with 55 million with equity funds, where we are really trying to develop equity financing, making the link also indeed with real economy, private intervention, and really also linking startups and academia, research and concrete implementation of innovation to really have those spin-off and universities supporting the SMEs in that takeoff with joint ventures in AI and so on. I can come back to it, but I think it's already important to flag all the money that is going concretely in that direction.
Thank you. Of course, money is important. So do you think that the conditionality behind all this money is finally the right thing? How the Commission can push these ideas that sound marvelous to everyone to really make the governments stick with this goal and make them happen?
Okay, so your question is actually centered on the RRF tool, so the Recovery Resilient Facility tool, and which is very specific. The other EU initiative and access to e-funding are functioning on another methodology. And so for those in the room who maybe are not familiar with the functioning of the RRF is what we call a performance-based tool. So we have quite a lot of money, it's part of our reply to the pandemic, clearly with recovery, the immediate boost, but a lot of resilience, and so this bet on the longer term. And with every member state has developed a contract, if you want. In our jargon, it's in this council implementing decision, but I think you should see this as a contract between the European partners, the European money, and all member states developing a plan, which is, of course, specific to the member states, to its needs, to its structural weaknesses, where it needs to develop with indeed its long-term strategy of developing, the right measures, reforms, and investment for the twin transition, green and digital, both of them. And in that contract, we have what we call milestones and target. So it's very, if you want very clear, we have in a contract a timeline with clear deliverables in milestones, which are more qualitative requirements and conditionality, and target, which are clear quantitative targets with goals to achieve. And then in a strong cooperation between the national authorities and the European side, if you want, we are checking then the implementation. We are checking that at every meeting point and appointment we have in time, there is indeed compliance, or if you want, delivery, performance-based on those milestones and targets. And when these are achieved, we pay. And that's, in the concept, very different from our other European programs, which are more cost-based. You develop, you send the bill, you get the money. Here we really want this to be implemented and delivering results. And I must say, a word of congratulations also for Mr. Nedela here on the panel, because we have an excellent cooperation here in Czechia, and we were discussing this morning, and we are really collectively trying to, push through, stick to the timeline, and deliver those elements of the contract.
Thank you. Andrea, you revived when small and middle-sized enterprises were mentioned, so maybe how does your institution fit into the game, and what are your initiatives to leverage the money for investment? Marie mentioned that of course resources are scarce and we need to find ways how to leverage everything we have at our disposal. So what's your place in the game?
Thank you for your question. And once again, good morning, hopefully. And maybe before I reply directly to your question, I would maybe give us two basic questions: why we are speaking about the growth and how we basically want to achieve the growth. The growth is really one of the tools where we need to create resources. And why are these resources needed? Because we have quite a lot of expensive challenges ahead of us. We have a climate change, we have energy crisis, and so on, I can name it, digitalization. So that's why we are speaking about the growth. And also the question is how. So Marie already mentioned several of the EU initiatives or policies. I think the fundamental one now is the Green Deal, right? And of course, all of the smaller initiatives which come along. On our side, at the EIB or European Investment Bank group level, we have basically very similar approach, because we are not a policy maker, we are policy taker and bankers. But what we do is that we really look at the policies which are endorsed by the European Union, because we are the investment arm of the EU, owned by the member states. Actually, it's Ministry of Finance who is our boss, who is our governor. And so we are looking at these priorities, and we try to leverage our resources in order to meet the policy objectives or policy targets. And the second maybe mission that we have also is to implement or to react or get involved when there is a crisis, when really the economy needs anti-cyclical support. So just to maybe complement on this growth discussion. And what we are doing is basically, and speaking about the SMEs and innovations, of course, this is very close to our heart. And we are not only starting this discussion because of the Green Deal or because of some current initiatives. We are here, for instance, at the Czech market active since its beginning. So it's almost 3 decades. And that's why I'm mentioning, because 3 decades, and during this time we have mobilized or we invested almost or nearly 30 billion of euros into the Czech economy, not only to the state, not only to the regions and cities, but also to the real economy. And now I come back to the SMEs, because when I was looking at some of the statistics, I was positively surprised to see that 1/3, nearly 10 billion of the euros have been invested or provided for the Czech companies or startups or basically funds that later on invest in these smaller economies. And how we do that, or how we leverage? Basically, we as the bank, we have, or the European Investment Fund, which is also our subsidiary in these regards, to mobilize even much efficiently the resources for the enterprises. We either provide them credit lines through our commercial banks, we either provide the guarantees to the banks so they can finance some riskier projects. But what we do, and here is also great collaboration with the European Commission, we also use the money to prepare the equity programs, the equity funds for the either venture capital or private equity investments. And As we are speaking about the digitalization and innovation, it's also important to say that, and also thanks to Professor for highlighting the differences between the US market and the European market and why we are also lagging behind a bit. From the perspective of investment, what we see is that the European market is more risk averse. That means that the investors, they don't want to, or they are not ready to invest in such a venture capital operations or startups. So that's why here we come, European institution, European Investment Bank, backed by some of the programs like InvestEU that we received the guarantee from the European budget and the European Commission. So we create the programs which really enable these funds and these later startups and pre-seeds and technological transfers and so on, really get this riskier part, because we are the ones who are taking the most expensive but the most riskier part, so the other private sector can come and can really boost some innovations and digitalization. So here in this is our role, to enable and to create this leverage for the real business, maybe to have a much easier way to go ahead with these investments.
Thank you very much. René, how does the national government fit into it? I mean, it's probably wonderful that these, let's call them supply-side reforms, are pushed from the European level. They must be close to heart, as Andrea said, to the right-wing oriented government. Will you be quick enough to make these things work and live longer if we take the political cycle into account? And maybe do you have some true success stories of digitization or RRF, because very often we in the Czech Republic are strong in seeing the dark sides, and we are not very good in actually showing that we actually did a great job. So is there a case study that could be presented here?
So first of all, also, thank you for invitation me here, and thanks for the discussion. And also, I would like, to highlight the cooperation with the Recovery and Resilient team from the European Commission, especially the team for the energy for the negotiation. The first. Second, Maybe I will firstly start, what you already said about the strategies, European strategies and also national strategies. I think that there should be also one target, to reduce the strategies. Yesterday we had a discussion with the people from the Chamber of Commerce, and the result was that from a statistic perspective, the Czech Republic has the highest number of strategies per people. Yes. I was surprised, for that, and I think that Europe will be on the same level. Why to reduce the strategies or why to reduce the legislation? Because, for example, and I will give you one example. Do you know what is AFER regulation? And for sure you know what is a RED III directive, Renewable Energy Directive. AFER regulation, says, that if you would like, to make a decarbonization of the transport sector, then you should go, the way, electric vehicles, and you should go way of hydrogen car. If you are talking, or if you see what is written in the RED III directive, then the way is high quality fuels or RFNBO, renewable fuels from non-biological origin, which means, in the Czech Republic that it will be biomethane, that the biomethane, will be main part of transport. And okay, if you have these two strategies or these two legislation on the table, and for one legislation is responsible Ministry of Industry and Trade, and for other legislation is responsible Ministry of Transport, and in one legislation you have just only these two ways, and on other legislation you have, like I would say, these three ways, there is a difficult, to find a solution which is the best. I think the best, and especially for a landlocked country as the Czech Republic, is that we should go use all possibilities which are on the table, and we should go, all three ways, and also use gas in a transport sector as an energy source. This is the first. Digitalization. I will give you an example. 2 years ago, there was approximately 10,000 of new installation, roof installations, especially of the solar. Last year, it was 30,000. First half of this year, it was 45,000 of new installation. If we will keep it as it is, without simplification, without digitalization, that there will be nobody who will be able to permit it, So it's very important, to go in line with the simplification and go in line with the digitalization, because there's no possibility, to find a solution for this. And we did it, Last year, during the energy crisis, we did the 7 novels of Energy Act. 6 of them were because of the energy crisis. But last of them, we call it like Renewable Energy Act 1. It was for the simplification for smaller installation, and we said, to 50 kilowatt, you don't need anything, you can easily build it, without any permitting. And that's the first, I would say, perfect example. Second perfect example is now, when we are talking with the colleagues from Recovery and Resilience Fund, and what is now in we call it RES 2. On Tuesday, there was a second reading of this legislation, and there are some, I would say, paragraphs, especially, for Recovery and Resilience Funds, for making the simplification and for digitalization. For example, there are maps that the TSO should present, on the websites where is free capacity and where is no free capacity. It will be digital, and you, as an investor, you can easily see if you have a land here or here, if there is a free capacity, and if you can, I would say, connect your power plant there or not. So I think that is second good example. How I would say results from Recovery and Resilience Fund and reforms, and not just only reforms, but also the investments are in line with the national strategies and what we are doing here. The last comment which I would like to mention here is where we need maybe to speed up and more to catch the opportunity of a Green Deal. It is in a sustainable financing, and especially in the energy sector, and not just sustainable financing for investment, but also sustainable financing for financing, not just only to put the money and say okay, bye, but we would like to come with the strategies that okay, it will not be bye, but it will be see you soon, and this is what is very important in front of us, important milestone and important target that we need to keep it like this, because if we will do it like bye, that the growth will be very slow.
Can you communicate it clearly? I mean, because from what I know, Green Deal is not probably the most popular set of reforms in the Czech Republic. So is it well explained to the general public how big the potential actually is?
I think that the topic of Green Deal is very complicated, and it is very difficult, to explain, what are the opportunities, what is the good there, and what is bad there. If I will go from this, what is bad, this is about this legislation. The legislation is not compatible. There are the problems with the legislation, but this is also happened on the national level. So this is one way. Second way, yes, there are good examples, how to work with the energy sector, to use the local energy sources. For example, sharing the energies, to locally, to consume the energy and not to use just only DSO distribution system, or transmission system, but to use it locally with your neighbor, with your family, etc. This is, I think, a good example. The third good example is that also there are, new rules about the permitting. How to speed up the permitting. What we can do for I would say better behavior. And how to manage it. One-stop shop and etc. So there are good examples and there are bad examples. And I think, that we need, it's not about if the Green Deal is or isn't. It is, okay, Green Deal is here, and we need to catch up this opportunity, and try to use what is good there. And if there is something bad, so let's try, not to use just only the bad examples, but try to use the ways which are, more better for the Czech Republic.
Professor Schweiner, without general understanding within the general public, can these kinds of reforms be permanent, irreversible? Because people are also voters and they will vote.
Sure, they can. And I think what's important is what we've heard here from the panel is that there are now concrete steps, that it's results-oriented approach. And that is, I think, a big change compared to what we've seen over the last 20+ years. Let me just remind you, somebody mentioned the Lisbon Declaration or Agreement, where in the year 2000, it was declared that within 10 years, Europe would become the technologically most advanced part of the world. So by 2008 and 2009, as we were meeting at conferences like these, it transpired that it was not happening. So a new agreement was that definitely by 2020, Europe is going to be the most advanced, technologically advanced part of the world. Well, it's not, right? So, so in some sense, one really has to set, results-oriented and compare relatively to others, because if you move forward and others are running, you're falling behind, right? So Europe has to realize, and all the decision makers, that yes, results-oriented, that's important, and it's happening apparently. And second, that it has to be always looking and comparing to what others are doing, so that we can really move ahead. And so here, just sort of mentioning the small and medium-sized enterprises, really an important sector, which in countries that are doing well, that's a very dynamic sector. And there, I think, some important insights to be used are, for instance, that within that, an emphasis should be really on new firms, because a small firm that's been here for 20 years is unlikely to become a big firm. It's established, etc. And yes, you can stimulate it, but it's not going to create the Googles, Apples, Amazons of this world. Some of the new ones might, right? So really the emphasis should be on the startups. So when we talk about small and medium-sized enterprises, let's focus on the birth, right? And these firms also have huge mortality rate. Most of them don't survive. So you have to stimulate them in a way that some survive, and those that don't survive can have a new rebirth. So here, for instance, the law on personal bankruptcy is very important, because when you look at countries where this works really well, like the United States, basically personal bankruptcy is a very quick and productive process. The person loses his television, his car, etc., but emerges clean and can start again. And in fact, the fact that somebody lent this person money for a project, and knowing that most projects don't lead into anything, most of these firms die, this is actually a positive result. This person has achieved something and is ready to go for the next project, right? So in many countries in Europe, Czech Republic being a good example, you have bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy law, which makes this person pay for his life. In other words, future wages are garnished, etc., right? So rather than that person being able to get up and start producing again, that person is marked, and in fact, hundreds of thousands of people in this country have gone into gray or black economy because the law essentially prevents them from operating and keeping the results of their work. So important things like these, I think, can make big difference in how it is. And unfortunately, the Czech system and system in other countries is really a legacy of medieval prisons for debtors, right? And so we start operating with that system today, instead of realizing that what we want is to make sure that these debtors quickly get over it, because after all, the creditors know that they are taking risk, right? They go into it and they diversify. They invest in many projects, knowing that most of them, will fail, but those that don't fail, the Amazons, the Googles, etc., will make them very rich. So in that sense, to penalize the people who are the bearers of progress, namely the entrepreneurs, by having a bankruptcy law which basically prevents them from being entrepreneurs further on, is going totally against where it should be going.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of those legacies is also how failure or mistake is perceived in Europe.
Exactly. That, you know, mistakes are natural things. And again, you want to make the system such that people learn from mistakes, both creditors and debtors, right? And that you really stimulate the entrepreneurial spirit. And here I would say Europe, again, has a big challenge. Namely, if you have startups that are technologically very good, and Europe has them, how do you keep them in Europe? Now, what these firms want to do is sooner or later is to be bought by one of the giants, because the giants can pay the most money for it, right? Well, the giants are not in Europe. They are in the United States. So it's very difficult for the best firms, small firms in Europe, to remain. I mean, they may remain in Europe, but they'll be part of Amazon, Google, Apple, you know, whatever, you name it, right? So in some sense, one shouldn't worry about it, although sometimes they're obviously brought to Silicon Valley or New York or wherever. So it's a challenge where, as a follower, and Europe is now a follower, not a leader in many of these areas, it's very difficult to become a leader given this particular setup.
Marie, this perception of mistakes leads us to education, right? You mention it. What are the specific steps that the European Commission can do in this field? And are we ready that these things maybe will materialize in 20, 30 years? Because I have 2 small daughters and the perception of mistake is already formed in kindergartens. So do we have some ideas how to change this, and are we ready that it probably won't materialize in this election period, neither in the next one, the next one, and the next one?
No, thank you for the question. And if you allow me, before turning to education, I'd like to thank the professor because he gives me the opportunity to talk a bit about Capital Market Union. Because the point he was making about how the bankruptcy procedure in the EU in several member states are a barrier to entrepreneurship, to innovation, is something which has been identified in Europe for many, many years. And unfortunately, I have to say, there is a Commission proposal on simplifying, destigmatizing, and harmonizing in Europe those bankruptcy procedures for corporates. The Commission proposal, I think, has been on the table for 6 or 7 years now, and it's what we call in Brussels jargon, stuck in council. So member states haven't been able to agree on what we call a general approach to actually facilitate that. Compared to the US, it's been touted for decennia as one of the elements to facilitate entrepreneurship and indeed foster that entrepreneurial spirit by, destigmatizing the failure and speeding up the process. Bankruptcies happen, but you can't be penalized all your life for it. And when in Europe, every member state has a different procedure for those bankruptcies. In some member states, it lasts 6 years. In others, more. And indeed, in some member states, you pay all your life because of one failure. It is not indeed simulating that entrepreneurship. So I think that it liaises very well that world of the supportive regulatory environment and what we can change that. It also makes a link into access to finance. Andrea was mentioning it, access to finance, the EU tools, EIB, the EU, but eventually it has to be private capital. And we can leverage them as much as we want, but in the end, you need private investors to step in there. And, if they get the feeling they'll be punished if they fail, and if they are barriers to access to finance, it doesn't help. So let me come to education now, because indeed it's a very important growth factor, and the human skills and our capacity to upskill, reskill is very key. Now, you know that in the end, EU doesn't have very, very strong competence. There we have, of course, many programs to stimulate that, and through some fundings we can, and in the RRF we actually fund a lot of reform of the education. And I can list you, for example, in a Czech plan, everything which is in that area. But I certainly concur that in the medium long term, the human capital side of it is one of those growth productivity factors. And we need to transition, and that transition is indeed very delicate. So we have in the Czech plan there a lot of elements to indeed prepare the skills for the future in green, in digital, and in general, you know, making sure that the people remain adaptative. So in the labor markets, and the labor markets are very tight now, in general. In Czechia, certainly, rather low unemployment, but in other many member states, it is the case. So you really need to onboard the remaining ones, especially women, to really come and make sure that we are at the highest possible employment level. But beyond that, of course, people need to constantly adjust in the labor market. So let me start maybe from, you know, the very basic earlier stage in that education chain. In the Czech RRP, with EU financing, there is support for increasing the number of places in nurseries, in crèche. So you have, you know, from the very beginning, earlier on, very young age, beefing up the capacity there, so you have more women going on the labor market. Then there has been also in the plan reform of the curricula in primary school, in lower secondary school, in upper secondary school, so gymnasium. And in all those, you know, along the whole timeline, promoting digital literacy, digital skills, making sure that they have the equipment and that the teachers are skilled to accompany that. So some tutoring of the pupils. Also, I mentioned all the reskilling and upskilling. There is, I think, in the program overall, money foreseen for 130,000 retraining, reskilling. And that's green and digital, making sure that we really keep at the frontier. There is also a lot of effort in universities and in the programs there. Upgrading, if I can use that terminology, the programs and so on. Also, again, to have at the university level, of course, those new programs preparing the new skills, also having in mind everything which then follows, which is the research, and then making sure that, you know, we will loop back again with the real economy, the SMEs and the startups.
Thank you. There's quite a bulk of questions in the Slido, actually. Comparing Europe with America and not being very kind made our audience quite excited, though there is a whole cluster in it. Maybe I will just pick one of them, because I think that we've elaborated a lot of how an American model can actually be of some relevance for Europe. The one question is, Europe is both the world's biggest exporter and importer of digitally deliverable services. So is it really the case that we've missed the train? Professor Schweinar.
No, I think in many areas not completely missed the train. I think it's important. Digitalization is used. The products that use the technology are used, and Europe is producing those and advancing and exporting. I think the question is, can it become the birth of new products, new technologies, new ideas, right? Because that's where the payoff is the highest. right? Once you just start using the technology, etc., it's important, but it's a much lower payoff. In the Czech Republic, there is this term montovna, which basically means you're not innovating, you're not inventing, you are using established, maybe modern technology to produce something with it. And so in that sense, yes, Europe is doing that. But I think what we're talking about is that Europe would really be the birthplace of the ideas, the early innovation, and so both invention, innovation, and then the rest of the world starts producing it. And so that's important, and I think that it will be important for the Recovery and Resilience Fund to aim at that. My impression is I was coincidentally here, one of the two coordinators when the RRF was prepared in the Czech Republic, and at least in the areas I know, and I don't know everything, it has not sort of allocated money to top-notch research. Okay, because of the bureaucracy here and in Brussels and everything, the projects that are being funded are projects which will, be helpful, but this is not where the cutting edge is being born. Okay, so that's just a feedback to you guys. So in that sense, it should be. Similarly, and this is for you, Mr. Deputy Minister, in the United States, one of the reasons why the US is moving so much ahead is there is incredible symbiotic relationship between the universities and industry, right? Producers. Firms are contributing to schools dramatically. Here they're not, okay? Very little. Okay, so this is a totally different symbiotic environment, right? And it's one can blame the schools for not being possibly receptive and so on. So I'm not saying it's just one way, but it also is the feeling, the makeup of the approach that those who are the producers, the firms, are not far-sighted enough saying we need basic research, we need policy-oriented research, right? And we're going to work with institutions. I started here one of the top-notch institutions called CERGI in economics, and we use the American model, and we've reached a really top-notch standard, okay? In Charles University external evaluation, we were the best. We were the best. But we have no chance from firms to receive support, whereas in the United States at Columbia University, we're of course getting a lot of support. So the approach to how to treat where the ideas are born and how they are developed is very important, both on the part of local firms and on the part of institutions within the EU. I think the ERC grants, for instance, are terrific. Okay, they fund top-notch research. But in the recovery resilience, I am hard-pressed to really point out where you're funding top-notch as opposed to here comes money, let's sort of use it somehow well, research. But well means mediocre, right? It's not the excellence which we have to aim for.
Thank you. Andra feels like adding something.
I would love to add just one element to complement Professor what he was just saying, and I believe that there is some light at the end of the tunnel in the RRF, especially under the one.
I was
nice
intentionally,
no,
just intentionally, just stimulate the conversation.
You see, here is the result. No, because what you are saying, and this is what I think that in my first intervention I was trying to make clear that it's really important that also the investment and environment is enabling, of course, besides all of these removing of the red tapes that we have, but we really also need to have a healthy investment environment to support the VC, the venture capitals. And what we have developed in cooperation with the European Commission and the Ministry of Industry and Trade here for under the RRF is really one of the fund of funds. The first part is with the allocation of 55 million euros. It would have 3 legs, basically 3 separate funds. And one of these funds is called or is dedicated to the transfer of technologies from academia to business, and it would be in the area of artificial intelligence. And I hope that this would be really one of the really opening initiative where these kind of projects can really rise. And furthermore, what we have discussed on the different forums here in Prague, but again in Czech Republic, is that you also need to develop the whole spectrum of this support for the firms. You know, you can't only have only one product for a healthy SME. You also need to look on this pre-seed side. You need to have a program which would facilitate the supporting of the technology transfer. Then you also need to have some kind of scale-up financing. So you really need to look at the whole growth path of the companies, and I think that this is also slowly happening at the capital markets market here in the Czech Republic, because of course if you don't have enough of the firms which are ready to have such innovative ideas, then maybe you don't have these funds, but it has to go hand in hand. So I hope that these are one of the examples that we are trying to put in the market, so it would help also the Czech economy and Czech firms to grow.
Thank you. To stay on the nation level, I let René respond and then Marie.
Thank you. I would like, to do the two reactions. First reaction is, to US. I think that we should also, to teach how they can present their ideas, and not just only ideas, but also normal work. I've been there many times. I've been there for work and travel program as a student, and when I spoke with my colleagues from this program, and when we spoke, for example, about the culture, they said, yeah, we are the best. When we spoke about the car industry, yeah, we are the best. They really know how to present, their ideas, and most of them are market-based ideas, So this is, what I think, we need as a Europe, what we need, to learn from them, because I think that we are sometimes as a shadow mouse, so something like that. That's the first. Second, about the cooperation between the companies and school universities. I've been assistant professor for almost 15 years on Czech Technical University and Czech Agriculture University, and it is exactly as you are saying. Sometimes there are companies, they are just only thinking that the smart people with the good ideas, that they will come immediately from universities, and they don't need any pressure, any push, from their side. So that was my feedback. But I will give you also a good example. I'm also chief of supervisory board of Czech TSO CHEPS, and I think that they started 5 years ago with its Energy Olympics. The name is like Energy Olympics, and it's for universities and for students, that they can present, their ideas. We can send them theses, that they can work with the real life, with the real projects, and they can present, real projects, and the feedback is very positive. A lot of some of the students, not a lot of the students, is now working for CHEPS, for Czech TSO, as an employee. So this is a good example, and also I think that, for example, CHES is doing good job in this field, but I think that also it's not just only about these, I would say, big players, but also it is about the smaller, players and smaller companies. They should come to universities. They will help, to teachers if they will bring, thesis. Hey, I have a problem here, and okay, I need to solve it faster, so it will be a better project, or I can do it in 2 years, so then it will be, diploma project. I think that this should be, also the good target if we can, little bit push it forward, and not just only for these, big companies, but also for middle and I think small or medium,
Marie?
No, thank you for giving me the floor again. I wanted to actually add one more financing source to the one Andrea explained very well, and indeed bouncing on the question on the European priorities in terms of funding cutting-edge technologies and so on. And they are indeed those key enabling technologies and AI. And at EU level, the priorities in financing research and innovation and providing the support and going towards those sectors. And I'm not an engineer, I'm only a poor economist, so I'm not sure I really understand what's behind, but I'm told I'm told that we are really focusing on those areas, micro, nano, electronics, photonics, AI, life science, advanced material, all that. And through the program, and obviously maybe our starting point compared to the US is the one that is there, but I think that there is really an awareness through Horizon Europe, ECR you mentioned, Digital Europe program, European Structural Investment Fund, to really retarget all this funding for research towards those sectors. And actually in the RRF, and then I'm complementing the tool, the equity tool, which Andrea mentioned already, we have now in the new revision CID, so in the new contract we've agreed with the Czech authorities, which was adopted now in September, there is actually a new tool, a new equity tool, with funding from RRF budget of 80 million, which will be, if you want, leveraged by EIF, and that will have the same logic that Andrea explained on the existing 55, but then now this time there's 80, and which is precisely targeted at those sectors. So trying to go to strategic technological sector, robotization, new technologies, material, semiconductors, biotech, and so on. Again, trying to really foster the research, the spin-off, using frontier academia work and working also on the transition with the real economy and SMEs, using also the access to finance there to have all those spin-offs.
Thank you. Another cluster of question is alongside the argument that it looks like only Europe and America are in the world, so let's dig into the rest of the world for a while. Latin America, Africa, China. So maybe for René, the role of China in Europe's digitization and resilience and self-reliance. For Andrea, do we have some tools that can, for instance, promote European ties with Latin America? And for Professor Schweinar, Africa and digitization. Thank you.
In field of this, in field of digitalization, it's not too much, my topic. I will try a little bit, to answer in field of energy, and how China is, working. What is happened here in the Europe, and what is impact here in the Europe if China is something doing. So first of all, from the perspective of critical infrastructure and digitalization, yes, here, I think, and we have a lot of rules, and a lot of legislation where it's written, that you cannot use, some of the strategic components, in the critical infrastructure because, there are some connections, maybe not too much favor country. But I will look mostly on the situation of gas, because gas is very nice example. 1 year ago, energy crisis, price of gas was 360 euro per megawatt hour. Electricity was 984 euro per megawatt hour. And that time, when we saw, what happened on the European market, the China market, and US market, we saw that, for example, typically in the US, they inject, the gas in their gas storages, and we saw that they postpone, the injection into their gas storages, and they send the gas to Europe. mostly same situation, but it was because of the COVID happened, in the China, that China, reduced, their consumption of electricity, and they reduced the consumption of the gas, and the ships, with the gas, drove, from China to Europe. But it was not because of, I would say, business model, but this happened because of COVID situation and about the economic situation in the China. But US, they did it because of the market situation, because Henry Hub price on the Henry Hub that time was, I would say, 7 times, 8 times, smaller than in TTF, in Europe, and they said, hey, business, why do inject the gas here, and keep it here, and to sell it, maybe in 1 year, still with the maybe small profit, we can send it to Europe, maybe we can add some profit, and still it will be more profitable, than here, and still the price will be more cheaper than what is the price, in the Europe, So I think that on this example, you can see, how the China or how I would say US energy market is connected also with the European market.
Thank you. Latin America was it, right?
Yeah, I'm just also looking at you where I'm traveling now. Although I have to say that I'm not a specialist on this region, but first of all, European Investment Bank, being the arm of the investment arm of the EU, has its activities all around the globe. Basically, we are investing in really like the, dozens of countries, including the region of Latin America. And what we basically follow here is again the external policy or the policy of the European Union on the external relations. And as we are looking at the development world, many times it really the needs are a bit different, and the needs are to build the basic infrastructure, but also as we are the climate bank, and we said that as of 2021 we are not going to invest into the projects which are not aligned with the Paris alignment. We somehow also define what are the priorities we want to support. And when I was earlier this year traveling a little bit in that region, I was very pleased to see, even if you are traveling and driving and then suddenly you see a big billboard which says like this water treatment facility was supported in cooperation with the EIB. I was surprised to see the logo of the EIB at the end of the world, but I was on the other side very, very happy that we have this footprint. And later on, when I spoke with the locals, and they said that in the capital just recently we have co-financed the hospital, and they call it the European hospital. It's really like so different in the approach of the really like ordinary people, because if you would be walking here, even in Prague, so many facilities have been upgraded, built with the support of the EU, but people are not asking or not really like appreciating that it's Europe. We have a tendency to point on the Brussels only if the bad things are happening there, or Luxembourg. So this is something that we are doing quite a lot, but the perception is so different as within the EU. And one of the very nice examples I will be very happy to share also with you, because we had on Monday earlier this week at the female empowerment panel as a part of the Urban Talks of the Prague European Summit. And so I read about one nice example how in Sao Paulo, where actually in one of the outskirts, 60% of the households are led by the women. And so we supported one project which helped to build the energy grid. So basically the households were connected to the energy grid. And what is the result? They got an address. And then with this, having the address, they were able to also access the finance. Really like basic things, and you don't realize how much of these small things can create an impact. And these are the things that we are trying to do across the world to really like look at the value added of our investments.
Marvelous, thank you. And the African think?
So first of all, I would just say that China is really a very interesting case to study, just to start, because it's the only country that for over 40 years has managed to grow dramatically and pass through sort of various stages and now includes the most modern, most advanced, technologically advanced firms. So it's possible. And especially impressive that it's a big country that did it, because when a big country enters any market, the price goes down because they flood the market with so much. So they cannot take advantage of the fact that they can use the big high price because they influence the price themselves. So that part I think is important.
How come that it is possible under the extractive institutions?
Yeah, but the Chinese basically have opened up the economic sector to entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit itself with the enabling environment, which politically was not enabling and is not, especially now, but until recently, at least economically, business-wise, it was. Now to Africa, I'm not a specialist. I used to work in Africa, but I haven't recently. But I would say there is an attempt, of course, to be technologically advanced, and one vehicle for it is the multinational corporations, because the multinational corporations take with them the same technology everywhere they go. So they basically bring the same technology to Africa as they use elsewhere in the world. And then there are examples of indigenous, progress that is dramatic. In Kenya, the use of cell phones enabled farmers to get world prices, so the Chicago Board of Agriculture Exchange and so on, and sell at much better conditions because they had information that they didn't have before. And so that, plus advances in micro financing and so on, have brought to Africa, progress that just wasn't there and wouldn't be there without the modern technology. But obviously, poor countries have a much harder time in this kind of global competition. So it is a huge challenge for them. And I have to apologize, I have to run. So I thank you very much, collaborators, everybody here, and please continue. Yeah.
We're almost at the end. I maybe ask Mari, the ugly Brussels, for some concluding remark about how marvelous the current cooperation between the Czech institutions and Brussels actually is.
The ugly Brussels. No. First, indeed, excellent cooperation. I think we also, the last 2 days, we were in Prague and we had very interesting meeting, very fruitful, on energy this morning, but yesterday also on long-term care, which obviously is also a very important topic to every citizen in the country. I think that, the ugly Brussels is, and how Brussels is portrayed, and there's several things we can do about it. I mean, on the one hand, actually every member state in the RRF has an obligation to communicate on the European origin of the funds, which is there. So we indeed attach a lot of importance. You were mentioning, having the logo, having the sticker. It's important indeed that, of course, us, the bureaucrats, if you want, but also in the national authorities, we communicate clearly to the population and say, look, I mean, this is indeed financed by Europe. It brings Europe closer to them. And we will have European elections very soon. So it's really important that they realize what Europe can do for them in their real life in terms of investment and reform. And I think that also the effort what we are doing, is, and it's very specific also in the RRF, there is a huge effort in terms of communication and transparency. And maybe it's not yet known enough. But if you want to follow what's going on with the RRF in every member state, okay, there is what we call the RRF scoreboard, there is an interactive map, there is a disclosure on the beneficiaries, so who gets the money from the RRF funding. So there is actually quite a lot of information out there in terms of what are in the plans in every member state, yours, but also the other ones, very concrete. You go on the website, you have a big map of Europe, you have different projects, you click, you see pictures. So I think that, in terms of communication, we're really trying to bring Europe closer to the citizen and make them aware of what we do on a daily work. us and the team is in the room, and also the Czech colleagues working on it on a daily basis, making this materialize in concrete.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for a very fact-based panel indeed. The time is running quickly. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. And I pass the word to organizers because there are some lunch instructions, right?